I think too, one area of the book that we focused on quite a bit was the impact for investors. I think investors realized early on that category design was sort of a, not a secret formula, but almost a must-have.
Hey, this is Tom Schwab, and I am so excited about today's episode because I got the chance to read an early copy of a book that's changed the way I look at all podcast guests and the categories they're evangelizing. Now, maybe you've heard of Play Bigger. It's the book that introduced the concept of category design to the world a decade ago. It's the Bible over my shoulder here. Well, today I've got two of the original voices, Kevin Maney and Mike Damphousse, joining us to talk about their new book, The Category Creation Formula. In this episode, we're not just talking about concepts. We're talking about how they have repeatedly put them into place over the last decade at Category Design Advisors. You'll learn why those preaching product market fit, well, they've got it backwards. You'll learn how to craft a point of view that makes you unforgettable, and the exact formula they've been using to create new categories. Context plus missing plus innovation. And here's why this matters to you as a guest. You see, most people are just drowning in a sea of sameness. They get ignored. They tell their story. But position yourself as a thought leader, the leader of a category of one. That's how you become memorable, referable, and you turn listeners into advocates, leads, and clients. If you've ever struggled to stand out, to clearly articulate your value, or to connect in the market in a way that actually converts, this interview is the roadmap. Let's dive in. Well, it doesn't seem like it's been 10 years since Play Bigger came out, and I was first introduced to the idea of category design, and it changed my life. It changed the way I look at life and business. But for those people that, when I say category design, don't know what I'm talking about, Kevin, you were one of the authors of Play Bigger. What did you originally mean with category design?
Well, quite simply, it's a way to create a market category and design it so it benefits your company. Now, so this is the factor that most companies had always been missing when they created. So, some company would start up, they'd have a product idea, they'd make that thing, and they try to sell it. And treating, as our old friend Chris Lockwood would always say, they would treat the market like it's the weather, like there's nothing you can do about it, right? When actually, if you think about it, a category, a new market category, is a space in people's minds. That's all it is, right? You open up a new space. You're opening up a new space in people's minds when you create something new, and so if that's true, then you can influence that space. You can design it so that people have a certain set of expectations around how that new thing is going to be. And if you're the company that can do that, then everybody's expectations are going to be set around the kind of product that you make, or the version of the product or the solution that you make. And that puts you in the driver's seat of that category. So that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but that's the basics of it, is how do you design that space in people's minds so that they expect that this solution is going to look like the solution you're producing.
And so most people talk about that product market fit, but you reject that and say that it's backwards.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Well, it fits exactly what we were just talking about. So, over the last, whatever it's been, 15 or 20 years now, in the tech ecosystem, especially, you always talk about product market fit. We're going to make this product, and we're going to find a market that it fits into, which is, to us, is backwards, because if you were to identify a market that needs something, a problem to be solved, and design that market, then you will know exactly what product to make to have a big market for it, and a market that's going to demand your product. So to us, the way a company should look at things is first to look at and design and create this market space and create the product that fits into it, rather than creating a product and saying, I'm going to find a place where it fits.
And when I first heard the idea behind category design and play bigger there, it reframed how I looked at it, how I'd been taught about things. So you'd been doing it for what, a decade before? Can you walk me through what led up to play bigger and then really what's happened in the last 10 years?
Yeah. So going back to 2013, 2014, now I had been friendly with Al Ramadan for a long, long, long time, and had briefly met Christopher Lochhead and had never met Dave Peterson. But the three of them invited me to a dinner in San Francisco somewhere around, I'm thinking 2014, and were telling me about some concepts that they were using as they were advising startups. And the concepts were mostly built around this idea that in most markets, and especially in digital markets, in any particular category, one company wins almost all of the market share. We would always throw around numbers like 75, 76% of the market. And so this was a conversation at dinner, right? So if that's true, then if you're an ambitious founder, why wouldn't you want to do everything you could to be the company that owns that category, because you're going to win most of the economics? And if that's true, then how can we kind of reverse engineer what it is that that great companies do to create and open up and win new market categories? So at dinner, I mean, I'm thinking, like, I'd been a journalist covering the tech space for a long, long time, and I thought, well, these observations are really on point, and I think this is a really interesting idea. And so we started talking about, is there a book in this? I don't know, maybe there is. Let's start looking. And so we started doing that kind of reverse engineering thing and really talking it through. And we started to realize there really is something here. We really could figure out how great categories get created and designed, and tell companies why that's important and how some of these greats have done it and help them do it too. And so we wrote the book. All four of us were on the, authors on the cover, published by Harper Business in 2016 in the summer. And so that book came out and just became a thing. Like category design quickly became part of the lexicon. And the book started selling, and CEOs and investors and other people started coming to us as the authors and saying, please help us do what you wrote about. And at that point, Mike, who has also known that same set of guys and has worked with them in the past and has been he can tell you his background in a minute, but former CEO, investor, CMO, all these, different things. So Mike and I came together and formed a firm, Category Design Advisors, to practice what we preached. And that led to a decade of working with all companies across all sorts of different fields, helping them with category design. And of course, as we did that, learning so much along the way.
And it's interesting, you said concepts, and that's so true that Play Bigger gave us the concepts. It gave us the language. You're the one that came up with the term category design, aren't you, Kevin?
Well, they blame me. I actually don't have a clear memory, but I'll take the credit. Chris and Al seem to think that's true. But I do recall, because we worked out of Christopher Lochhead's house in Santa Cruz, California. I remember one evening we're sitting there and we're just kind of talking about all these concepts, and Al, who had worked at Macromedia, when Macromedia created the concept called experience design. And he kept saying, like, as we're sitting there, he's like, I remember walking around the kitchen and he's saying, like, this reminds me so much of creating experience design. I mean, that was really impactful. And like, that's kind of feels like what we're doing here. And apparently I was the one who said, well, then maybe this is category design. And they were like, yes, and hallelujah, kind of clouds parted. And that was what it was.
I've heard from two of the four authors, well, I guess three now that you told the story, that you were the one that coined that term. You owned that vocabulary. You gave us that concept. And Mike, and I'll throw in here, if I call him Mike, if I call him Damp, it's the same person, Mike Damphousse. Mike, talk to us a little bit about when you take the idea of going from concepts to actually actually using them. What does that look like? Because you'd been doing it, but not with the terminology. So now with this new terminology, how do you actually execute and help clients execute on what they believe from reading Play Bigger?
Well, my history with the guys goes back to the early 2000s. Actually, 1999, I hired Dave Peterson to head up my marketing team at a startup, and I hired him away from Christopher Lochhead, which nobody held that against me over the years. But category thinking was always a way of what we did, right? And it kind of was a tribal thing. Lochhead and Dave kind of got it rolling at Mercury when they put together the Mercury plan. Al was working on it at Adobe, and I had always heard about categories and being different all those years. And I remember Chris brought me in to work on a project at Jive Software, and category was always top of mind for all of us, right? Everybody was thinking about categories. And so when the book came out, I remember, in fact, Kevin, I remember going to Santa Cruz. It must have been right after you left. The dust had settled, but the stickies were all over the house. And there were these yellow stickies all over the room, the dining area, all over the table. And it was basically a culmination of all these ideas getting ready to be formed into a book. And I remember when I first got my hands on a copy of the Galley, the pre-release version of the book, and reading through it, I'm like, holy shit, this is more than what we ever thought it was. It was always, everybody was very, very focused on marketing and what this meant for marketing. But what the book really laid out was this was a company-wide strategy. And what Kevin and I learned once we started CDA was that if the CEO was not behind an effort like this, it never took off. You can have all the greatest strategy in the world behind category design, but if it's spearheaded just by marketing, it's gonna hit the brakes, right? It's just not gonna take off. The CEO has to bake the category into the DNA of the company. And that's when we Kevin and I forget, it was one of the early years we had started doing this, and we threw the word strategic in front of category design, and strategic category design sort of became our emergence of the new discipline. And it was much more than lightning strikes. It was much more than, the category point of view being an instrument to communicate to the world. It became the strategy of the company. And so the new book is all about everything we've learned since then. And people will find that the book is much more about strategy and the science and the thinking behind it than it is about bringing it to market. And that's all in there, yes. But that's after you do the heavy work, the heavy lifting.
So the book is category creation formula. And so with category design, there's always that question of what problem are we trying to solve, right? So explain to me, 10 years after Play Bigger came out, the problem that category creation formula solves.
Well, I'll start with it. Kevin and I stumbled on something in the first year or two of doing this. And that was, there were so many companies that wanted to talk to us about what they were doing, that we just put free office hours on our website. Anybody can book time with us and talk about category design concepts. And I think we talk to about 200 companies a year doing this. And the part that became evident in the early years was Play Bigger introduced the idea, but it didn't give the playbook. It didn't give the solution to people. So all these people read Play Bigger. They said, oh, I'm going to be a category designer. And then they were fumbling. They didn't know what to do next. So when we decided to write the book, it was a big discussion. Kevin and I were like, well, should we give away all the secrets? We make a living off this. And we said, shit, let's do it. Let's put everything together in a playbook and a framework that, it's not our minds doing the work for people, but it certainly is. It's the playbook, and anybody can get the book and walk it through, and with a solid team, get together and execute.
And thank you for that, because as you talked about the problem, I resonated with that because we've tried to execute the strategy. And we got most of it right. We got a lot of it wrong, but it was sort of like the first time you put a puzzle together, if you don't have anything to look at, is this right? It's tough. Whereas you guys have seen it over and over and over for 10 plus years. So you talk about being able to read the book and do this. Are there any other ways that you're helping people really execute on the formula and going from concept to actually formula?
Well, first of all, the book is expressly designed to help people do it themselves without but however, there's one thing that we absolutely realize, which is this concept of perception versus perspective is what we call it in the book. And so every individual and every company has its own perception of what it is and what the world looks like and how the world sees them. But that's a little myopic because you're only seeing your own perception. And by having someone else come in to work the category design process, I mean, this is what we do, but it could be anybody, but anybody who understands category design. But by having that outside perspective that can tell a company, like, you're drinking your own bathwater, or we see the same concept 10 times in the past couple of years. You're not being different. You're just kind of being this, trying to be a little better than somebody else. And that's not a new category. These kinds of conversations. Sometimes that outsider can help a company or an individual see their place in the world a little more clearly than if they're just doing it themselves. So on the one hand, the book is a recipe and that anybody could follow. But I would also say that there's a great deal of value in having some kind of an outsider in the room that's driving that process and bringing a different kind of perspective to it.
And I would agree with you on that. I think of it as like a physician, right? That has seen the same thing hundreds, thousands of times. And you can give up the 2-minute explanation, and then they give you the diagnosis because they have that really perspective on it. And that's what you guys have done for me, in that you talk for 10 minutes and you'll summarize it down into 3 words. And it's like, that's perfect. That's that clarity. That's that point of view that the market needs.
Well, we just worked with a really fascinating and big client just a couple of months ago, and we finished. The kind of culmination of a lot of our work is this thing called the POV, which is captures the category story, and we read it back to them in this meeting. This is the leadership team. Like, there's like a dozen people around. And then we asked for their feedback, and one of the key leaders of the company, asked, like, well, how does this make you feel? And he said, well, I feel embarrassed. I said, what do you mean you feel embarrassed? He said, I feel embarrassed that we couldn't come up with this. But I said, like to your point, Tom, I said, you shouldn't feel embarrassed because it's so hard to do that from inside of your own organization. And having these outsiders help you get there was what made this possible.
Well, and the idea of getting there so much quicker too, right? If they worked on it for another year, would they have gotten it? I don't know, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
appreciated it a whole lot more when you gave it to them.
Probably.
And it's so liberating to see, when Kevin and I are working with clients and all of a sudden we do that point of view presentation, and it's just so liberating. Everyone in the room, they just have this weight off their body of, oh my God, that is the category we've known is there. We just couldn't articulate it. And the process of going through category design does that for them. Think of it as therapy. So many people have been through therapy. It's therapy for the leadership team to identify how to express themselves and how to express the category.
And I see that after you help them bring that clarity to it, then they bring that to the market because their response is very similar to their client's response with the said, that's exactly the problem I've been feeling. No one has explained it better than you, so you must be the experts on it.
Exactly. And I mean, that's what we've said since going back to the Play Bigger book is that if you can accurately describe someone's problem to them, they believe you have the solution. And so a big part of this is, yeah, I mean, once we do the work with a company, is the company being able to turn around and express the problem that their particular audience has in a way that makes the audience go, oh God, now I really get it, right? You understand, and if you've got a way to fix this, bring it on. It's a way, it's a way to open doors instead of having, you get hit with a sales spiel and like all of a sudden you're closing off because you think somebody's trying to sell you something. Um, and it's an age old practice, right? I mean, the old challenger sales tactic, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's like telling somebody the problem they have and then offering the solution rather than the other way around.
Years ago, I had somebody that told me we're all selling Preparation H. And I stopped and I said, "Excuse me?" And he's like, "Yeah, nobody really cares about your product or service. They care about their problem." And he's
Right.
like, "Once you can show them that you understand the problem, then we can talk about the problem or the product or the service."
Yep. Yep.
So uh, I always want to start with category, right? What's the category, the point of view, and everything? And one of the things in the category creation formula that struck me was that most leadership teams jump straight over the context, and that's why it's not working. Can you expand on that a little bit by what you mean on context and why that is so foundational to creating a formula?
Well, let's go back for a second so the title of the book is The Category Creation Formula, because there is actually a formula. So one of the things an important part of this book is there's several new thinking tools that we've created and we've come to realize that work really well to help companies go through a discussion and get to this sort of category conclusion. And somewhere along the line, many years ago at this point, we realized that there was this great little formula that helps people think about a market category. So the formula is simply context plus context plus missing plus innovation leads to a new category. So, and you're right, Tom, that this is a very different kind of discussion than most companies have, because the first thing we say is, so context is basically what's changing around your target audience. And that can be technology changes, AI coming into the picture, for instance, is a big context shift. But it can also be all sorts of other things, like a pandemic happens or supply chains get disrupted by geopolitics. You know, what is it that's happening around your target audience? And so by putting context first, we're saying you first need to have a deep discussion around that and understand what's happening, what's changing, and if you really can understand that really well, then it starts to be clear what problems exist that either could not be solved before and now can because there's new technologies or new contexts involved, or has all of that created new problems that never existed before. So if you really understand the context, then you can start to see what we call missing, which is what's missing now in this new context. What are the problems that need to be solved that we can now solve? And if you can see that very clearly, and you can describe that missing, then it's so easy to describe the innovation because you're basically describing something that's going to fix that missing. And if you put all this together, you're telling a story that says, here's the context and how it's changing. Here's the problem that exists now, this missing thing that has to be solved. And here's how you solve it with this new innovation. And if you put all those things together, you can label it as a new category of product or service. And it's very simple, but it's also, as you pointed out, it's not the way most companies talk about strategy. And this is a strategic conversation. And it opens up all sorts of new ways to think about what you're doing as a company.
It's ordinary to you, but amazing to others. So tell me more about the launch of this book and what you have planned for the impact that the category creation formula is going to make.
Well, the book is scheduled for release in North America on February 24th of this year, and in Europe about 2 to 3 weeks later. They've already been signing other languages as well, but it'll be available in hardcover, Audible, audiobook, as well as Kindle.
Version coming out in India too.
Yeah, in India, and you can pre-order the book at thecategorycreationformula.com. And we're doing a launch event, which will be really fun. It's going to be at NASDAQ on March 3rd. And we're doing the whole Times Square, the NASDAQ tower in Times Square with our, book graphic and probably our faces up on the Times Square marquee. It'll be a fun time.
I can't wait to the book to come out in hard copy because it's going to be right up there, right next to Play Bigger, because those are the foundational books that this company has built on. If somebody hears this, what's the next step? They're interested, they want to read the book, but is there anything that you would talk to them about? Bigger picture than just the book. What difference can this make in their business, in the market, in their life?
Well, I mean, so going back to Play Bigger, which was really, initially, mostly targeted at companies and certainly, largely, especially, the startup ecosystem. But we ended up hearing from so many people who said that it really had an impact on how they think about their careers or what they do. And just this whole idea of even the simple idea of being different, not better, right? That being different sets you apart in a way that just saying, our knob goes to 11 does, it does, right? And, so I do think that this, this book, again, expands on that, gives people new and different ways to think about their own lives and their own careers. And I would not be surprised to end up hearing that it had that kind of impact on people too, not just on a company strategy, but on a personal strategy.
I think too, one area of the book that we focused on quite a bit was the impact for investors. I think investors realized early on that category design was sort of a, not a secret formula, but almost a must-have. People, investors don't want to invest in a bunch of competitors. Investors want to invest in somebody that's going to build and own a category. So the book puts a lot of effort into investor thinking. So, as much as CEOs and startup teams should grab the book and devour it, investors should do the same, and hand the book off to as many startups as they invest in.
But both Mike and I have throughout our careers have spent a lot of time in the venture capital circles, right? And so we have some understanding about how they think. And I think one of the really interesting and important observations that we detail and get into in the book is that really the really smart investors, um, when they're getting pitched by a company, what they're really listening to first is this a category that's going to exist and be important? They're not really first listening to what this company is itself is saying. They're really listening for, is this going to be a big, important category that I want to put my money behind? That's number one. And then the layer behind that then is, so if I'm now convinced this is going to be an important big category, am I seeing the company in front of me that's going to be able to pull that off? Because one of the things that is the worst thing that can happen to you as a venture capitalist or an investor of any kind is to invest in the right category in the wrong company, because that means that you're going to see some other company and some other investors capture all the wealth from that category, and you're going to be on the wrong horse. And you can't invest, if you can't invest at a competitor. It's really kind of against the rules, right, of investing. And so we try to tell this not only as something investors should be interested in, but also if you're a company that's going to try to raise money, you have to think that way. You have to first convince the investor in front of you that this is going to be a really big and important category. Then you have to convince them that we are the company that can build this and capture this category. And that's the order you have to think in, not walk in with a pitch that says, okay, here's what we do. Here's our product. Here's this gee whiz thing. That's kind of backwards.
I think of that, or worse yet, come in and say, here's this great big market. We can get 1% of this, and 1% is this. It's like, no, I'm not betting on the losers. I'm going to bet on the legends. Anything else we should touch on before we wrap up here?
Well, I will say this. So, look, I wrote Play Bigger with 3 other guys. And all 4 of us, we've, business-wise, we've gone in different directions. We still all talk and over a period of 10 years, as you can imagine, I'll think about category design in slightly different ways 10 years later. And we try to point out in the book that that we have discovered a way that works for us, and that in particular we developed because we tend to work mostly with pre-IPO, early stage startups, and those companies, especially, they don't have a lot of time, and they really need to hit things in a fast and get something they can move on quickly. And so we discovered that that moving fast, that lightning version of category design really works well for companies. And it also works well because it creates sort of a momentum. So things don't have time to settle in and stall or whatever. And so we do recognize that we're presenting a way to do category design that we found really works for the kinds of clients that we work with. But one of the things that's so cool about what's happened since Play Bigger came out is that there are thousands of people who call themselves category designers, a title that wouldn't have even existed. Nobody would have thought of a decade ago. And they're all practicing this in their own ways and own different ways. And so there are probably many, many ways to do this right. But we're presenting one way that we know has been tested and works, especially for a particular kind of company.
If I'm betting on it, I'm going to bet on one of the original members of the band and the ones that have the 10 years of experience with it. So thank you so much for taking us from just concepts 10 years ago to actually how to do it with the category creation formula.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome, Tom. Thanks.
What a conversation. I hope your mind is buzzing with ideas, because the category creation formula, it's more than a book. It's a blueprint for changing the way the world sees you and how you show up in the market and on podcasts. Kevin and Damp didn't just launch the idea of category design. They've spent the last decade refining it with real companies in the real world. What they share in this episode and in their book is a system. It's a formula, one that can help you stop competing and start leading to become the only choice. So here's your next step. Go to categorycreationformula.com and order the book. Use it as a working session to define your context, identify the missing, and dial in that innovation that you can bring to the market on your next podcast appearance. And remember, on every podcast interview, you're not just sharing your expertise, you're shaping how people perceive the problem and how they define the solution. Do it well, and they'll understand that you're the leader. You're the one that can help them. You can escape that sea of sameness and become the only choice.